Hi everyone. Wow, what an amazing discussion you had last week around Black Lives Matter and labor union. I've been really inspired and really impressed with your growth and your ability to self-interrogate and to look within yourselves and outside of yourselves as well to, the profession, our education system, the media, and everything in between. So thank you for engaging honestly and for showing some vulnerability and um, just really good, what can I say, old fashioned discussions with the gloves off. Thank you so much for that. That's really inspiring and yeah, I need to commend you for that. So I want to make a few points about some of the things you talked about. I'm going to talk about the media, education, and specifically social work education, and some of our hesitation for shifting or changing or doing things differently. So I'll talk first about the media. The media conglomerate is owned by very few people in this country and other countries around the world, at least mainstream media. So the ones that you see on TV every night and hear on the radio, they're mostly owned by, white skin privileged people. So people of European descent or white passing people. So that should not come as a coincidence that what they choose to report as news is really aligned to how they see the world and what they think about others in the world. And the fact that they may have a splattering of different kinds of people in relation to different sexual orientation or gender or race does not mean that the system is improving. What it means is that there's an add-on effect where additional people are being added to a system that is already broken, which is why no matter who goes into the system, it still seems the same because the rules are the same, the games are played the same way, and so things will result the same way. Sometimes there's a little bit of a difference where somebody doesn't play by the rule and then that person in the media is punished, is usually fired or scrutinized in a certain kind of way that encourages the person to step back in line. So we should not be surprised that Black Lives Matter are, that the issues for Black people or the concerns for Black people are presented in particular ways to demonize Black bodies, including Black children, such as, little Black boys or little Black girls. Because in fact, what happens through the media and through life in general is that Black children are not given the space to come of age. They're not seen as young people that are making errors. They are not afforded that opportunity to make errors and be supported into growing up. They're seen already and treated as adults even when they're children. So there is no room for Black bodies to grow into adulthood without the scrutiny and the demonization and the retribution that comes with those things. So keep those things in mind in terms of the media. The other thing is, you talked about this in your group as well, is that the media is invested in making sure that it positions itself in a particular kind of way. So once somebody talked about how, all of a sudden, the issues that Black Lives Matter is bringing forward is being seen in some parts of mainstream media that are considered to be a little bit more progressive. But you also make the point that these medias are in fact benefiting in some way, shape, or form from bringing these stories forward. So they may appear that they're doing something positive and they're transforming how the news is presented, but in fact, without the bottom line, they would not continue to support or expose some of the things that happen to Black bodies. And if you look at, for example, Nike, who I'm happy that they use Colin, the former football player, in their major ad campaign. But what we should really know is that Nike calculated that using Colin would be a gain for them, because the amount of free publicity that it got from, people burning shoes on Facebook, or, people being outraged, they could never have gotten that kind of publicity for free. They would have had to pay millions for it. So keep those things in mind when it comes to the media. I think I need to be quick now. I want to talk about education, because when you question why we do not change, even though we've been exposed to education, there are a couple of reasons. One, we benefit. And one of you put a beautiful picture up about a pie, like sharing a part of the pie doesn't mean that you get less. In fact, it's multiplied, but we don't think that way, that when we share power, our power is multiplied. We think that when we share power, we actually lose something. So the thing is, we don't change, one, because we're actually not invested in the change, because we're all implicated in white supremacy, as Bell Hooks reminds us. And so because we benefit, we're not in any hurry to change anything, because we're pretty comfortable, right? The other thing is, we're not quite sure about some of the things we talk about. So people aren't quite sure that racism actually exists to the extent that we talk about that it exists, right? And that is why in schools of social work, we still have predominantly white male, to a certain extent, white female Eurocentric perspective that drives social work education. And that really is the foundation of social work education. We have an add-on approach where now you have different racialized and gendered bodies, or people with different lived experience in the classroom. So they're bringing in literature that promotes their idea from their own lived experiences. But for the majority of social work education, it's still basically from a Eurocentric point of view. So if you're not consistently getting the education that's going to challenge you to think, reflect, and to change and or transform, then we will always have this perception of what social work is, and that really there is not a big deal with racism, that some people are just complaining and they have some chip on their shoulders. But the other thing that happens when we talk about whether or not racism truly exists is that people are typecasted and scapegoated. So in schools of social work, as it appears everywhere else, you have what a colleague of mine would say, the good anti-racist and the bad anti-racist. So the person who appears to say the most to challenge whiteness and white supremacy is usually stereotyped and branded as the bad anti-racist. And so there's a litany of things that will happen to that person. And I can tell you that I have had those experiences in schools of social work from students and colleagues and administrators, because I'm considered to be a certain kind of way, right? I don't toe the line enough, or I'm too excessive in doing certain kinds of things, or I'm not traditional enough. It doesn't mean that people are bad. It just means that they're sitting in their white privilege, and they're feeling pretty okay that where they're sitting is where they need to be. And I will continue to challenge that. And that's why I was so impressed with your discussions where you were challenging yourselves, because most often in social work classrooms, what I see is that we're looking outside We're talking about what everyone else is doing and how everyone else is awful and how everyone else is racist, and we're not interrogating ourselves. You did that beautifully, so thank you so much. And the final thing I wanted to talk about is just a little bit of a connection between labor and Black bodies. So the labor union, as with political parties, can always depend on Black votes or Black bodies to support their cause. And Black people are usually quite vocal about issues of race, for example. And so trade union can always depend on those bodies to say the things that they need to say. However, trade unionists also have white privilege or white skin privilege or white passing privilege, and so they may not be as invested in dismantling white supremacy as Black people might be. So those are a few things to consider. You also look at, similar to schools of social work and the media, who is at the head of the trade union. Whoever is at the head is whose perspective you're going to get for the most part. And that means Black voices are always at a minority because they may be sitting at the table to have the discussion, but the voices may not be enough, and the white colleagues around the table may not be understanding or believing that racism exists to the extent which some of us believe it does. And so you get the cycle, or you run around in a circle where, you know, people are saying it's not that bad and other people are saying it is bad, and you start wondering, why are we not on the same page, and why is the conversation so difficult? And I did say the last thing, but I have one little thing to say, is that I would like to challenge you, after you leave this course, to ask yourselves, what will you be doing to contribute to the dismantling of racism around you in your personal lives and in your career? And I understand that there may be limitations because, you know, you do have to work within a draconian system. However, what happens a lot is that once the course is finished, people tend not to think so much about it anymore. And that's natural because you don't have the support beside you, and there is probably no incentive to do that. But I'm going to challenge you to devise a plan that puts in place incentives for you where you remain committed to dismantling racism, because you know that that is a violent system of oppression that really needs to be eliminated. I'm going to leave you with that.